and his opportunity to teach them is coming to a close. All right. So let's start reading at John chapter 13, verse number 1. And, I just wanted to point this out. This is what takes place in the upper room, right? They have found this place is not any of the disciples' home, but they found this place that someone will let them use for the purpose of Passover. And so they're in this upper room, and Jesus begins here in verse number 1. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. Verse 2. And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he was come from God and went to God. Let me just stop there for a moment, because it's so telling that at this very solemn time, when Jesus knew that his time on earth was coming to a close. It's interesting, the devil shows up there in one of his disciples. It's so interesting that he shows up. Okay, so now Jesus, it says in verse number 3, it says Jesus knew two things. It says that Jesus knew that the Father had given all things into his hands. Jesus knew that the Father had given all things into his hands. Jesus knew that the Father had given all things into his hand. And so Jesus knew that what had been given him by the Father could not be taken away. Amen? Isn't that a good thing? Especially looking at the fact that here he is at a very solemn time, and there's the devil already entering into one of his disciples to betray him. Right? And so knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, so then there was nothing that could be taken away from him, nor was there anything that he couldn't accomplish. Because it had been given him. So there's no power, there's no force, there's no deception, there's nothing that can overcome it, because the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he was come from God and went to God. Come on, man. That's so important. Because Jesus, in his journey, once he transitioned from his physical body, Jesus had a journey to take to go to hell. And he needed to know that wasn't the end of the journey. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes you get into situations and you need to know that this ain't the end, that I have a better end coming. And so he knew he came from God and that he was going to God. And since he knew where he was going, no matter what he went through, it wouldn't discourage him. Come on, man. That's good news for some of us, because most people, when they get discouraged by what they're going through, and they begin to see what they're going through as some kind of final destination, like they're never going to get out of this, like this is so big. And instead of looking at what they're going through, they should look at what they're going to. That was a real weak amen for some folk that might be going through some things right now. Thank you for that one glory. Amen. Amen. It just shows us Jesus held on to two things. He held on to the fact that the one that supplied what he needed for the journey was the Father. And that he came from the Father, and he was going back to the Father. Amen? Amen. All right, I'll move on. Verse number 4. He riseth from supper and laid aside his garments. All right, yeah, I'll go ahead. He riseth from supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. Verse 5. After he poured water into a basin, he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Jesus answered and said unto him, What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. Peter saith unto him, Thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Thou hast no part with me. And so that was an important act because it was necessary. It is necessary to have part with Jesus in order to be where Jesus is. All right. Verse number 8. Verse 9. Simon Peter saith unto him, Lord, not my feet only. Now you're getting all spiritual. But also my hands and my head. Jesus saith to him, watch this. Last verse. He that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, and ye are clean, but not all. Amen? Amen. All right, so now, this might not be the most exciting text, but I want you to understand some things. The reason that I wanted to read this is because I believe that Jesus was teaching the disciples something much deeper than just washing feet. Now, I think that in a lot of circles, they have copied the act of washing feet without recognizing that what Jesus was teaching was not the washing of the feet, that there was something spiritual connected to this, and that the foot washing was a metaphor. Amen? Amen. All right, so now watch what Jesus said. Well, you know what? Let's switch over. Can you change that translation to the NIV? All right. And it says, Jesus answered, Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. And so I submit to you that what Jesus is talking about has to do with an inner cleansing. and inner cleansing. All right. And so, there's several things here. But first of all, uh, let me just talk about the custom of the day, and we'll understand it from that point, and then we'll move on. The custom of the day. Well, during this time, they weren't as fortunate as we are today. Not everybody had a personal bathroom. And so where they bathed in bath houses. And so, maybe a block would share a bath house, or, I'm making up something. I don't know how many people. A community would share a bath house, and everybody would go there to bathe. And so let's say you were invited to dinner, and you go to the bath house and you bathe, and then you walk to the house that you were invited to. Well, because of the dusty nature of the environment, you had just bathed, but by the time you got to the place where you were having dinner, guess which part of you was no longer clean? Your feet. Your feet. And so it was customary to wash guests' feet. Amen? In other words, just like it says here, if you had a bath, you only need to wash the feet. Amen? Amen. Okay, so now, what Jesus was talking about for them, first of all, we understand that it's spiritual, because look at what Jesus said. He said, those that have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Right? It says their whole body is clean. Right? And you are clean, though not every one of you. And so he couldn't be talking about a literal bath, because it's not that all of them had taken a bath except Judas. Right? Yeah, that's not the case. It's also not the case. And, what Jesus is saying here is that you will never need to bathe except to wash your feet. And so this is a process that has begun, and then there's a bath, and from that point, there's only a washing of the feet. I think I'm losing some of you. All right. Let's go. Yeah. Peter said, Lord, in verse 9, Peter said, Lord, not only my feet. Yeah. Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. And so to this, Jesus said, if you've had a bath, I only need to wash your feet. In other words, the rest of you is already clean. Or can I give you another word? Pure. Cleansed. Okay? All right. And so this is a spiritual cleansing. And what Jesus begins to talk to them about, and actually, as you look at John chapter 13, Jesus is talking, let me just expand that a little bit. John chapter 13 and John chapter 14 are talking about an inner cleansing. And then in John chapter 15, they begin to talk about what that inner cleansing produces. And so it talks about, he's talking about washing you spiritually and getting you spiritually clean on the inside. And the purpose for that is this, people. It can be common for folks to think that they can just change the way they act. And so I can act more Christian, or I can act more holy, and that will make me holy. Well, no, you have to change from the inside, and that will change your actions. All right. And so let's turn to Titus. Titus, let's see, what are we going to look at here? Yeah, let's just go right to chapter 3. Titus chapter 3. And I'll start reading at verse number 2. Let's start at verse 1 so it's clear. All right. It says, put them in mind. So it's talking about the people. The book of Titus is a letter written to Titus from Paul about the Cretians, or the island of Crete, the people, the inhabitants of the island of Crete. And so Titus was ministering to these people, and these people had several different attitudes and practices that Titus was, faced with. And rather than trying to make the people change, which is all